I wanted to kick us off and welcome everyone to this live speaker series with Michelle Carrizosa. We're having this conversation, and the conversation is called Talking Confidently About Your Accomplishments. The prompt for this discussion, I guess, is in our TMRG meeting a couple of weeks ago. One of the sessions that we had, Ashley actually had a great question about like how to best express the great work that you're doing at remote, express the great work that you're doing in an all remote space. Because I think that we face a pretty unique challenge being distributed and needing to find creative ways to share and talk about the really great work that we're doing. So after that TMRG call, Kyla and I went out on the hunt to find a great person to come and speak to us about this, and we found Michelle. And so we're really excited to have her here today to just hear about her coaching expertise and her advice on how we as women at GitLab can be really confident and excited about speaking about the things that we're really proud of. So if you haven't been to one of these live speaker series before, the structure that we follow is we do short introductions like I'm doing right now. Then we'll transition into a fireside chat between myself, Michelle, and Kyla. And there's 4 questions that we already have drafted in the doc, which I'll send in the chat. And we'll go through those 4 questions. And then after those 4 questions wrap up, we'll open it up to team member questions in an like AMA format. So as we're chatting, if you have any questions for Michelle that come up or follow up questions or new questions, please feel free to add those to the agenda and we'll get through as many as we can after the 4 questions that we already have drafted. Okay, so with that, I am going to turn it over to Michelle to introduce herself. Thanks, Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samantha. And so, hi everyone. My name is Michelle Carrizosa. I am a career coach based in Paris, but my previous life was actually in Seattle as a woman in tech as well. I was a program manager for a number of years at Amazon. And after that, I pretty much decided to start moving into a space where I'm helping more women get into fulfilling and profitable careers also in tech. So that's what I've been doing now. And so I've been having a lot of fun doing that. And a lot of it includes kind of working through ways of how to navigate tech in the best way that works for us. And I know that can be a little bit challenging as someone who was in tech for over 6 years. I know how challenging it was for me to actually acknowledge and talk about my, accomplishments all the time. So I'm excited to be here talking about this. So today, as you saw in the questions in the doc, you'll see I have already some of the answers that I want to share with you. And I'm very much so someone who is focused on like little strategies that you can start using as like habit trackers and things like that. So hopefully that is going to be helpful for you. But as I am going through my answers, I definitely encourage you to ask as many questions as you want. So if there's maybe like something like a flag, right? And you're like, oh, maybe this won't work for me, or maybe this will, I want you to put a question on the document. That way we start going over those at the end.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so I'll kick us off for this first one, and then Kyla and I will ping pong them back and forth. So this first question is, what is your definition of an accomplishment at work? And can you help us define and expand our mindset on what we might consider as an accomplishment?
Yes. I love this question. When I was going over it, I was like, let me go back into like what does actually like accomplishment means. And like one of the things that I saw was that the actual definition of accomplishment is successfully achieving a goal. And I think that's where sometimes some of our hesitation comes from, because when we think of the word successfully, we already take out the fact of trying. We are like, whether I did this successfully or I didn't, right? Or we actually, when we also think about the word successful, we think about really big goals. And that is just how, so in society, we tend to see like successful and goals as this like really big thing that unless it's this big, you cannot celebrate it or you cannot acknowledge it. So those are the things that it had me thinking about that. So the way that I want us to start thinking about accomplishments is in a very different way. because they all come in different shapes and sizes. And instead of us thinking about like those big, huge wins, like the promotion or like the big project or like we got the big client, it is really about seeing that all of them are worthy of talking about, even though we consider them small or consider them big. And so considering also like it takes out a lot of, if we only think about accomplishments and like this big successful thing that I did, we're taking out all the amazing things that we have been learning, all the amazing things that we have applied and that we have initiated at all, right? So this is how I wanted to start reframing accomplishments. So the next definition is kind of like how I best like to see it, and it has been actually really helpful for my clients. So accomplishment is the action or a series of actions that you've taken to drive impact. The beauty of impact is that it can also be measured however we want. It comes in all shapes and forms, like I mentioned before. And that means that because you're taking action every single day, as if impacts, because impact is coming in all shapes and forms, that means that you're actually every single day you're accomplishing something, right? And that is not at all what we're told. Even when we're going into tech or even in school, all the time that we're growing up, we're never told that every single thing matters, that every single thing has impact. And so that I think is where the main issue comes from. If you're someone who's kind of like maybe afraid of talking about your work, or maybe you're afraid of talking just about the small things. So this is a perfect definition for you, knowing that this is just an action or series of actions that you've taken to drive impact, and that impact can be measured however we want and however we decide, right? It comes in all shapes and forms. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit of a process to make this easier to apply. And this is going to be setting the foundation for the rest of our conversation and the answers that I have for you. And these are two different strategies that I have seen really effective for people who want to be able to celebrate their work a little bit more personally, but who also want to have something that they can have as a baseline for them to lead conversations about their accomplishments. The very first thing is something that I call a win list. And this is a win list where pretty much it's just a personal list. You can use a Google Doc, or maybe you use like, if you like a notebook like me, you can also write it down every single day. It's more of like a habit practice where you are mentioning all the things that you are proud of, and pretty much you're giving the opportunity to yourself to celebrate the day-to-day. And so this can be, for example, learning opportunities. Maybe it can be celebrating how you're growing in your current role, maybe a shift that you've noticed in how you're handling things that is also worth celebrating, right? And going back again to the idea of wins or accomplishments, which I will be using interchangeably, they all come in all sizes and they're all just as important. Like a small win is just as important as something that we consider a big win, because we're ultimately just creating that impact through our actions. So one of the examples that I have, for example, maybe you put today's date if you want to start up today, and you can just say something like, I don't know, like maybe today I send out an email without feeling like I was overthinking too much. Or it could be like, today I created this boundary in my work of not leaving later 5 p.m. or something like that. So all of those are small wins that really help you start incorporating those into yourself first before you start having those conversations, right? And so the second strategy that I have is a little bit more around the lines of when you're talking to colleagues and you're talking to managers, which is just the foundational, going more into detail. But this is also because when I usually give the win list, people are like, okay, Michelle, like these are the small wins, but I cannot just tell that to my manager and so on. I have to have a separate list. And I do agree. So the first one is a little bit more for you to start getting comfortable celebrating yourself and the work that you're doing. And the second part is a little bit more specific to your work and the goals that you have there. So the second list would be a separate list. And the first step to this is actually identifying themes. So we all have different themes around our specific role, right? We all do very different activities on a daily basis. We all have maybe 4 projects right now or main responsibilities. It can also be about expectations that have been clearly outlined by your manager. But in other words, the themes of your role, they don't change too often. Like they're the base, like they're almost like the pillars, right? You also use themes versus pillars. So for example, I'll give you the example for me when I was a program manager. most of the tasks that I was doing were falling into three different pillars. The first one was managing the budget of a program. And the second was a technical expectation that my manager placed on me, and we agreed on that, of launching features. So that was the second thing. A lot of the activities that I was doing were falling into that one. And the third one is that I was being constantly a point of contact. So it was a matter of communication, right? And so now that I identified the three themes, and you can do this on your own time, it takes a little bit of like diving deeper into seeing how your role has been looking in the past couple of days or a couple of months. And you identify, okay, like what are some of the themes of my role, of some of the pillars. And once you identify them, then you can leverage GitLab. I know that you guys have some sort of tracker there, even Google Docs. I also have another tool that I'm going to be sharing with you on the chat once I have the time to kind of like jump in there to keep track of, that is called the Hype Docs. And this is just pretty much keeping a track of your wins around those themes, right? So for example, if you have a win around one of those pillars, maybe let's go back to my own pillars, which was one of them was managing the money for a program. Maybe there was a time where I was able to increase the amount of money that was being spent, right? I would put that under that theme. And so I know that it's really related to me and my goal of managing the budget of a program. So that's how you would then select the wins that you're sharing on there. And the main thing with all these strategies that I'm sharing, the win list and this list for around the themes of your role, is that you want all of these things to be visible for you first before it's visible for others. And that's going to be the next question, I know. It has to be really visible for you. You have to be able to see that it's valuable for you. And that way it's a lot easier to start advocating for it once you get out there into those conversations.
Great. Thanks for that, Michelle.
I think I have the next question on the board here. That was great, Michelle. So many great takeaways, and I love the idea of a win list. I'm definitely on board in thinking differently when I think about that approach and how to implement that. So that's great. Thank you for sharing. Can you maybe share with the group some strategies for how we can talk about and share our accomplishments with our colleagues, especially in an all remote environment like we are all across GitLab?
Yeah, I love that. And so when I was also thinking about this question, I was like, I think that, a lot of people in tech love to say like, oh, it's all about visibility, right? And this term is often like thrown around a lot. And if you notice, it normally comes without a specific set of instructions, because it sounds like it's just about get visible the whatever way that you can, right? And like you mentioned, being in an all remote environment sometimes can either make us do more of that or less of that, depending on our personality. So how I want to define effective visibility is by doing this little like combination of three things. So effective visibility happens in a remote work when there's first, obviously, the act of actually highlighting your insights, your wins, your accomplishments. The second thing is choosing the right space for you. So in this case, it could be an online meeting, a one-on-one, maybe an internal conference if that's happening over at GitLab, a Slack or any task management tool that you guys have, and then email. So those are just like the digital spaces that we're choosing. And then the third thing would be the applicability to the person that you're speaking to. So what is the common ground there, right? Because it has to be kind of like applicable to the conversation. So using these three factors that I just mentioned, you can actually come up with a custom strategy that not only works for you, but if it actually feels safe and it feels a little bit more aligned to your personality. Because what happens is that when it feels safe and it feels more aligned to your personality, you're likely to do it more often. Otherwise, it's gonna feel like it's really hard to do. And so you wanna make sure that when you're selecting one of these three things, like the act of highlighting, the right space, and the applicability, that you're thinking about how can I make this easier for myself to get out there and start getting that visibility, and just sharing the things that I'm doing right now, right? So here's a quick example I'm gonna kind of walk you through. So the first idea is like, let's say that you completed a task in relation to a bigger project where multiple people were involved. And the action that you took was that you completed the task 24 hours faster than the deadline. Okay, so for you to start sharing that, you have to be thinking about, okay, like, do I feel more comfortable sharing, like, again, choosing the space, right? As space that feels a little bit safer. So if you're a little bit more on the extrovert side, you can do it in a meeting. I don't know if you guys have those, but like back in the day, I know that we had like the stand-up meetings when everyone is giving like a little bit of like an overview of what they've been working on. And then if not any other meeting like that, maybe like a one-on-one where you feel like it's a little bit safer, but you're speaking it out. Or you can either do an email, or it depends on your personality, right? Again, like you have to choose the right space for you and trust that that is actually enough for you to start getting out there while feeling safe. The second thing is who is the applicability to the person? Who are you communicating this to? Do you want to be a little bit more visible with your manager, your colleagues? So depending on that, you can mention, for example, like, okay, let me just send you like a quick kind of like a weekly email where I'm letting you know what I've been up to this week, and then that's it. Or you just kind of like setting that foundation there for you to be like, oh, you know, if I'm working in this project, I'm gonna start giving you updates every so often or so. So again, choosing the right place for you and choosing the applicability to the person is really important, because I already know that a lot of you have lots of wins, lots of things that you're doing. It's a matter of just presenting that in the right space to the right people, right? And so something that is kind of like a law that I like to kind of like introduce you to in a way is that your personal wins at work positively impact others. Every single action that you're taking at your work, whether you like to think so or not, is actually positively impacting those around you. So if you're someone who becomes this person who's celebrating her wins, who's talking about her wins, you also inspire others to do the same, but you also kind of put yourself in front of other opportunities, and you also kind of like create this more positive kind of like energy in the team. And this is something that I've definitely noticed in my teams at Amazon, and also with my clients who start doing this a little bit more often in their work. And to finalize, because I always like to give examples before, like they're like, oh, but I don't know how to start the sentence and so on. So for me, for example, let's say that I have a win, and I know that I'm someone who's a little bit more extrovert, so I would talk a lot maybe in like a meeting. So if we're all giving an overview of what we're doing, instead of saying things like, oh, this is the problem that has been happening, whatever, you make it more so about the impact that you've been driven, right? No matter what the activity or action is that you took. So I would say, okay, team, you know, like this week I completed an essential task in the roadmap 24 hours before it was due. And it was such a win for the team and myself because it allowed us to do X, Y, and Z. And so that's how I would kind of like set up the meeting, right? And so again, for me, that feels safer because I'm a little bit more of an extrovert. But you can also reframe this as a win through an email or in a one-on-one, or you can even frame it differently with different words, as long as it's portraying the amazing things that you're doing. So that was just a quick example.
Thanks, Michelle. This is great. I love that you're giving us like really like, you know, almost these like frameworks, like these thinking about the visibility, like highlighting, choosing where to share, who to share it with, and these like sentence frames make it like, you know, something you can just go start doing today or tomorrow, which like feels really empowering. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. This next question is similar to this last conversation that we had, because it's about, you know, wanting to highlight your wins to certain people. And so I'm wondering, like, if we want to highlight a specific accomplishment to our managers in our one-on-one meetings, and that's something that we do at GitLab across the board, is people have one-on-one check-ins with their manager pretty often. I'm wondering, like, what are some questions or conversations that we could start with our managers if we want to bring up these wins? And it might be too repetitive of this last question. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as I'm sharing this, again, like I recommend that if anyone has any questions, like specific, I know that the one-on-ones they bring up all the questions. I know that we have all some feelings about the one-on-ones. So bring them up as I'm going through to kind of like what I have to say. But one of the most important things that I see a lot of people missing, that I missed for years myself as well, when it comes to one-on-ones, is that we let the manager kind of like run wild and take over this conversation. when in fact this conversation is, okay, yeah, it's a conversation, but it's a little bit more on our side to catch up with them, to be able to highlight our accomplishments, to get in front of the right opportunities. And if you notice, when you get started in tech, they always tell you like, oh, this one-on-one, this space is for you, and so on. But then you have like maybe 2, 3, and then you start kind of like going back into, okay, the manager is right. It's kind of like leading this whole conversation. And here's the thing, managers are extremely busy people. So they will try to make every single opportunity to talk to you about work or about how you've been keeping up with certain problems, right? Or some of the things that happened to me a lot was that they would ask open-ended questions like, how is everything going? And then we just go on and on about something that might not even be a problem, or that is not really that important to discuss. And or another thing that happened to me was, or a lot of my clients as well, is that they have like a chit chat for 45 minutes because no one is sure about what to say or where to lead the conversation. And then just do 15 minutes of a recap of the work that I've been doing, and then we call it a day. And people leave those conversations feeling like nothing has been accomplished. They feel like, oh, like maybe I should have said that. There's a lot of shoots after, right? And if that's you right now, that means that there may be some opportunity for you to make those a little bit better, or like make them work a little bit more for you, while maybe expanding a little bit more of your comfort zone. Because I've seen that for comfort, we just want to be sitting there and just kind of like not ruffle any feathers, not say anything. So for it's just kind of like expanding that definition and being like, okay, maybe I have to set some expectations, some boundaries there. So this way would look like, right? So it's up to start leading those conversations a little bit more. So there are 4 things that normally happen in a one-on-one. So the chit chat, normally like a quick kind of like talk about how things are going, especially because you all are in a remote space and you obviously want to keep it human. The second thing is like problem solving. So if you have a problem, you bring it up and the manager maybe helps you brainstorm around it. The third thing would be planning, right? Like, what are the next steps? What are the things that I'm doing after this call to solve that problem? And then the fourth thing is the growth talk. Accomplishment talk counts under growth talk, because the only reason we're talking about our accomplishments is to have the right visibility, to have the right opportunities come to us, right? We're someone who really wants to get into more projects, maybe wants to grow, maybe wants to get a promotion eventually. So this is how I would recommend. So the truth is that you can create the expectation at any time with your manager about what you want to get out of this conversation. And I know that this can be like, if you feel that you may feeling a little bit challenged by the question of being like, you can create expectations anytime, put it in the questions and I'll answer it. And so something that I want you to do is really start analyzing your past 4 to 5 one-on-ones, or if you haven't been taking notes, maybe do it for the next 4 to 5 times. And notice what are some of the topics that you tend to discuss the most. Do you feel that they are aligned with what you are trying to discuss at this time? And if you identify something that you want to change, it's about starting expectations with the manager, right? Maybe let's say that you analyze your 4 to 5 conversations, and you're like, oh, he's always just coming to me with like how to do all these things, and I don't know where to come in to talk about my wins, because he's just all about, or he or she's just about like taking the action and whatever. Like, managers can be really action focused as well. So this is just as easy as saying something. You can either say this at the beginning of your conversation when you're one-on-one manager, or you can also send an email. Again, choosing the right space that works for you, because it has to be a place that feels safe for you to actually take the action. Otherwise, the brain is just liking to postpone things. So this is like just a quick template that I would use. So I would say something like, hey, Sarah, let's say that that's my manager. I'd love to start my one-on-ones to talk a little bit through my wins and accomplishments around this project, to set the tone for a conversation, and it also helps me keep track of them. Does that work, right? And you always ask the conversation, it's a conversation, right? So you're asking her like, does that work for you? And then the other way that you can do it, if you want to do it a little bit less direct, is that during the conversation that you're currently having, you just use different wording around the things that you're accomplishing. So you could say things like, this week I'm celebrating myself for being able to do this in 24 hours. Or this was a major win for me and the team, and I'd love to be included in more work like that. So those are a little bit more subtle, but they still have the wording of celebration, of I want to be putting right in front of the right opportunities type of thing, right? And the key here is really not, I know that we have a lot of holdups around one-on-one sometimes, because it's just like maybe we have some story, like some history with our one-on-one managers and so on. So the key is showing up really open and really curious about keeping the conversation open for both of you. So not making assumptions that they will say no because this is something that we don't know, or assuming that they won't like to hear that because you don't know that. And again, going back to my earlier thought, which was all positive of wins or personal wins that you have are positively impacting your team. So coming from that mindset of like, I need to include more wins and more accomplishments in my conversations. Just coming from there, don't assume that they won't like to hear about that. Okay, it's just about being open to have a conversation. So if they say no, like, no, I don't think that's a good idea or something, or that is not something that I would like to do, reopening the conversation again and kind of like getting curious and brainstorming in ways that you can keep them informed about the work that you're doing still. So I have actually an example of this. I had a client who, she started working in tech, and she was not technical, but she ended up working with someone who was incredibly technical. And this is where personalities kind of like come in, right? This was a manager, he was an engineer, and most of his team under him were engineers. And then my client was a program manager, so she was a little bit more on the non-technical side. So she tried to open the conversation and be like, I really want to grow over at PayPal, and I want to make sure that I'm telling you my wins and so on. And he, in a very engineer, maybe like cut and dry fashion, he said no. He said like, I don't think that's a good use of our time, type of thing. So instead of her kind of like closing up, because when we hear no, we're like, oh, like, no, I don't want to do this anymore, it's too much. Then she decided to open it up again and be like, okay, so then if you don't feel that this is the best time, when is the best time? Because I really want to grow here. What are some of the things that we can do, right? They started brainstorming about a lot of things. And then she realized that she would do a combination of like the subtle one, where when they're talking about problems, she's talking about, this is a major win for me, I would like to do more work like this. And then she started doing a bi-weekly, like every other week, she was sending kind of like just a quick update about what she was doing. And again, we care that this person is opening the emails, but she's also mentioning it in the conversation. And the point of all of this is to actually have something in written that you can also show them and be like, when the time to like put up the salary comes up, or when you maybe potentially want to get promoted, you are keeping your wins in track. That way, if you change managers, or if this person maybe like starts being a little bit more open to promoting you, you can bring up those emails and be like, for the past 2 months, 3 months or so, I've been sending you all my things. So that way they don't come up with something like, oh, like we don't have enough wins for you to like get promoted and so on. You have everything written all the time. And so now that is, again, opening the conversation, even if they say no. And so that is just kind of like an idea of how I would go about going into one-on-ones. I don't know if I'm seeing any questions yet now I see a lot of questions. So we'll go on them later. But that is how I feel about one-on-ones and how it's been helpful for my clients too.
Great. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle. Last question here, and then we will turn it over to Orit for her question. So a lot of people at GitLab contribute to the company outside of their role-specific responsibilities. How do you connect these accomplishments and contributions to success in your role that you have within the organization?
Yeah, I love that so much. I'm a huge advocate to kind of be the same, kind of like, it's gonna come out weird, but it's like kind of like being the person that you are outside and inside of work, and knowing that everything is interconnected. Like a lot of the things that you're doing outside are applicable inside, and vice versa, right, of work. So the key really here is tapping into our unique experiences outside of work and gather from them the best tools that we can leverage in our role. So I have this example, and then I'm gonna tie it back to us. So it's kind of like saying like, okay, so let's say that I'm a semi-pro athlete, right? And then I decided nothing happened there. I get hired at a corporate company. As a person, I am someone who, as an athlete, outside of work, I'm someone who has a lot of grit, used to training long hours, comfortable with a little competition, and that is all coming from my personal experience. Yet, those are all things that I can decide to use in my corporate job. and kind of like make those my attributes or my superpowers to be the way that I kind of like to be the superpowers and the things that I leverage to solve problems, create insights, or even just provide examples. So it's the same for you. So get to know the tools that have allowed you to accomplish and contribute outside of your work. And don't be afraid of bringing them into your toolkit at work. So the toolkit at work that you have is normally like your past experience, but also you get to put things that are not work, quote unquote, work related, or that you're not getting paid for. And that is how you connect these two, right? And going back to visibility, you can also make it about visibility, and it's part of who you are, right? You can say things like, I did a very similar project before outside of work, and it resulted in this, this, and that. It taught me this one lesson, so maybe we can do something and try it here for this specific occasion, right? And so now you see I'm bringing in something that I learned outside that can help me solve problems right here. And the truth is, most of like volunteering, some people even have business outside of work. Anything that you're doing outside is applicable to solving problems inside. It's just a matter of how you're presenting that and how you're embracing that as part of yourself.
I love that. Thank you so much for providing a lot of great, like, I love that actually the term that Samantha used, frameworks. I feel that I have so many takeaways just from the first part of our discussion here with so many things to think about. So thank you so much for providing some great insight. Orit, I'm going to turn it over to you for a question that you have for Michelle for us.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Michelle, thank you. This is very insightful. So my name is Orit Golwinski, and I wanted to ask you, there's a struggle between being educated, and maybe this is a cultural thing, about being really humble and being able to really confidently talk about your accomplishments. So what tips do you have on bridging this gap?
Yeah, so do you feel that you feel that maybe you want to be more humble? Is that?
I feel like there's this constant struggle between how I was raised, where it's like you shouldn't talk too much about yourself or whatever, and how I should talk about accomplishments.
Yeah, so let me ask you a few questions. This is the coach in me, but I want to understand a little bit more. What happens if you talk a lot about yourself in a one-on-one?
So I'll talk about me, but I've also seen this happen to people that report to me. People get really uncomfortable. I get really uncomfortable. I just kind of want to get this over with quickly and say what I have and just like move on to the next subject. Yeah.
So what is the worst that can happen? That's a better way to reframe the question.
I don't think there's anything that bad that can happen from this besides, feeling like show off or bragging too much. But it is something that for me, I mean, it's not something that I like the suggestion of the list for yourself first and then getting comfortable with it. But for me, it's like not something that I'm used to doing and giving myself praise or things like that. So
yeah, and I feel that there's always a connection there. That's why I asked the question. So normally there's two things. It's kind of like how we're being socialized or like how we grew up. Like if we were told, don't share your accomplishments, obviously we're not gonna share them that easily. It's gonna feel really unsafe to do it. And that's why exactly I put the win list, because people are not even used to celebrating themselves outside of like behind the scenes, right? Like barely a lot of us want to celebrate a promotion, right? It feels like, oh, it's too much, anyone can do it, whatever. So that's why it's important to have the win list and to make it a habit. Because now when you start getting a little bit more used to and safer celebrating yourself, it's a little bit easier to start having those conversations with people. The second part to this, obviously that is kind of like the long-term kind of like vision here for you to celebrate yourself in a way that it becomes easier and easier for you to talk about these things. And the second part is this saying that I'm not really exactly sure where I heard it, but maybe some Women in Tech conference, which was, it's not bragging if it's based on a fact. So if you notice a lot of like our male counterparts, they will just say things, it will just come out, right? Like it sounds like they're a little bit socialized differently, but it really comes from the fact, and every time that I've asked them, because I see it, with my husband and so on, when they seem to be really confident, but it's really just, they're like, well, this is a fact, I'm just gonna say it out loud type of thing, right? The problem is that that comes a lot from us believing, and I think I mentioned that somewhere in the conversation, was that we have to believe it first. Like if we don't believe it, it's going to be really hard for us to just kind of say it without feeling icky or without feeling like we're talking too much about ourselves. So it takes a little bit of that internal work at first, or taking that other approach of like, you're like, okay, I have these wins, I want to share one of them, which one feels the most factual to me, and then just choose that one and then just say it in a way that maybe when you base it on facts, maybe you feel a little bit safer. So those are the two options here that I would, that's how I would bridge it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully it's helpful.
I just wanted to add to, I was in a conversation at GitLab yesterday, and we were talking about receiving feedback, because I think that's like the other side of this is like maybe when someone praises you, you kind of also get that like, let's get this over with. I don't really want to talk about this. And I just said it in this call yesterday, so I wanted to say it here again too, is that like what became so obvious in that call is that everyone on the call felt the same way. And I was kind of like, well, maybe if we all feel the same way, we can recognize that and then like try to move on together from it. And like if we all start doing this, then maybe we can kind of like change the norm and change how each other is feeling about sharing our accomplishments and about receiving feedback on them. So just wanted to share that. But
And honestly, I feel that now that you mentioned that, I think that it applies to everything. And it's not just at work. I don't know who was saying, I think it was some sort of life coach, that, you know, even when people praise you on something else, when they say like, oh, I like your hair, or I like, I don't know, your shirt, we're usually like, oh, this is a really old shirt. Or,
yeah.
oh, I didn't comb my hair today. Like, it's just very, like, what, however we're showing up in those one-on-ones or in our work, that's how most likely we're showing up in other areas of our lives. So it's something just to be at the beginning, it's just something that is not like you're broken or anything. It's just something to be aware of and be like, maybe this time I don't say anything. I just say, thank you, I love this shirt. And then that's it. Or, you know, if they say like, you're doing such a great work, you can say, thank you so much. And then that is a full sentence, right? Yeah.
Another thing that happens if somebody compliments you, you have this trend of finding something that you have to say back right away because you feel that you have to like equalize, where you're just like, they said something about my shirt, so I should say something about their, you know, jacket or something to make to make things more comfortable for like each party. Like there's something with like a balance there too that is psychological for some people that just is, oh great, it's no big deal, like let's move on to something that has to do with you and not me, or you know, focus on something else to make us more comfortable. And I think that you're so right that that has ripple effects in different areas of our life and in our career too.
Yeah, I love that so much. And also like our ability to receive, right? To receive just for the fact of receiving without giving anything back, which doesn't have to be all the time, but we can just say receive it with open arms and just stay at that. Yeah.
Sarah, I think you have the next question. You want to vocalize it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thanks, Michelle. This is all great. I think it relates to the previous question and maybe has been answered already, in that maybe just practicing it and using the frameworks today and going forward is enough to start counteracting that gender socialization that, like, I wondered how you would kind of stop playing down your own accomplishments and how you would model talking about them, speaking about them to other colleagues, other women, exactly as Samantha said, potentially who all feel awkward and who maybe are going to feel awkward for you as you're talking about your accomplishments in a group. And then like outside of the work context, like I have a 3-year-old daughter who is in daycare and is already being gender socialized, and I'm doing my.
Oh, you went away.
You muted, Sarah.
You got muted.
To try and stop her from apologizing to her toys in a way her brother doesn't, but like how you would model that every day. And maybe it is just accepting compliments and that's enough, and kind of slowly but surely mentioning your accomplishments across all areas, but yeah, just your thoughts on counteracting that socializing in and outside of the workplace.
The thing with socializing is that society does a really good job with the whole building momentum. So they do it little by little and then just keep going until, it's just so ingrained in us that we're like, not that we're helpless, it's not really that we're helpless, it's just that we have all these things that we're like, well, is this how I'm thinking really, or is this how I was socialized? So they do that in, like, society does that really well, to be honest. However, for us, that means that when we're starting to get into a journey where we're wanting to show up a little bit more fully or more presently or more authentically, is really about starting small, also with small steps, kind of like doing the same thing that society has been doing and doing it in a way that we're also not shaming ourselves. Because that is the other part, because we also been doing like, oh, like I haven't been doing this for like the past 30 years. Oh, like what a shame, like I should have been doing this faster. Like there's no shoulds. It's just, now I know this. What is like the smallest steps that feels easier for me to start implementing now? For me, like 1 year from now can make a huge difference. I've seen people do the win list and 3 months later, they're a whole different person. Like they're like, they take it really seriously. And then they're like, at the beginning, they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about my experience. And then that's all that they can talk about. And they're super excited about finding creative ways to do it, right? And I'm like, that is exactly what it takes. It just takes a little bit more of that really intentional type of work where you're not doing it also out of a chore. You're doing it because you really are wanting to like explore a little bit more, right? So for example, if you sit down and you're like, okay, today I'm gonna start this win list that Michelle said. Then you are like, oh, but I don't have any wins today. Or like, just get curious about those thoughts versus shaming yourself. So I would just get curious and be like, do I not really have something, or am I afraid of putting something in paper? Or like, just explore it with yourself, right? And be like, okay, like if I don't have anything, then I'll just run through the things that I did today. Maybe you send 2 emails instead of 3, like just finding it in the little things, what people call the little places and the little moments, and just start getting used to advocating for those for yourself first and celebrating those for yourself. And again, these are all things that 90% of people are not doing. So we are not used to celebrating ourselves. So once you start doing it like for 1 to 2 months, so 1 to 2 months, maybe like not daily, but every time that you really feel compelled to do it, ideally at least twice a week, then you start getting into the habit of celebrating yourself, and it starts changing certain patterns that we have from socializing. And I know that you mentioned with your daughter, I feel that that is the most prime time that you can actually start doing things for her in that sense. Whereas you can be like, oh, maybe I heard you apologize to your toys. What do you do? Or like, let's talk about like, just not in a way of, again, shaming her or like making her wrong for it. Just being like, just getting curious about it and be like, oh, maybe next time, try to do this. That is another option. There's always another option to the behavior that we're having right now, right? So just presenting that as a way of like, oh, there's a million ways that I can feel about this. So I'm gonna go with this one that feels a little bit better. And I know that for schools, it can be really hard to know how they kind of like socialize children. So it's just kind of seeing, maybe having more conversations with your daughter about like, oh, what do you learn today? And then, kids are usually getting everything out. So you're gonna find out what sort of things they're teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, celebrate her accomplishments then.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. So yeah, it's a journey for sure. Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Sarah. Well, we're just at time and there's no more questions in the doc, so I'll wrap us up. But thank you so much for being here, Michelle, and thank you to everyone who made time to be part of this discussion. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm really grateful to learn from your experience, Michelle. For everyone on the call, Michelle is coming back to GitLab in 2 hours or so for another session. So if you didn't get enough and you're still working, you're welcome to join again. But yeah, thank you again, Michelle, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, it was great being here. And thank you so much for the questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Take care. We'll see you.
Great. Thanks all. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
I will see you guys later.
Okay. Bye, Michelle.
Bye.